Okay, now you're living in LA, obviously, which is probably the farthest you've ever lived from your family. Is that really hard on you? The fact that you don't have this support network that you're so used to relying on?
Um, it is a bit. Both my siblings actually have young kids,
Hmm.
and so I'm feeling the West Coast uncle problem. I see my nieces in snapshots where they're just every time I see them, they're a different person. Right? It's like you used to be a little ball that couldn't talk, and now you're running around asking me questions, and it's amazing and it's really cool, and they're both lovely, but it feels a little bit like I don't know if you're the same way, but like I had the relatives who lived near us
Hmm.
who had a real relationship with growing up, and then you have the relatives who live far away, and it's they're lovely people, and you see them once or twice, maybe every few years, and you have great interactions, but you don't have a real relationship with them.
Hmm.
And I think being the one member of my family who's out west right now, I think is a bit tough. But I mean, at the same time, I feel lucky that I kind of built up a community here of people that I feel really close with. There's some friends from college who are out here, people in esports who haven't left yet, who are here. That's been helpful. But I long term, I'm looking to go back.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and with me today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this person who's really a friend of mine. He is known for his incredible diva cosplay, but more importantly, he's the senior analyst. He was previously the senior analyst of Philadelphia Fusion over Season 1. He has now transitioned into a new and improved role of Director of Game Operations and Analytics for Comcast. Please let me introduce Ethan Spector, maybe better known as Beezy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Blake, thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited to kind of get into this. Some people might say that you have a one-track mind for analytics, and I kind of want to get into that a little bit as we kind of go into the show. But I always like to start it off very easy as we get into the show. A lot of people might not know this, but back when you were in university, you were actually in a band called One Track Mind.
Oh wow, okay.
Yep. So one of the things that you were quoted saying is, "We write, sing along music. At the moment, holds firm belief that basic rock and roll music can be just as good as obscure indie hip ska reggae fusion music." I did not know that hip ska reggae fusion music was a huge thing. What kind of music scene were you living in?
Man, all right. So I went to Wesleyan University, known popularly in the media as PC University, and it was just a lot of incredibly talented people, but very much a fringe everything, right? Like Wesleyan was everyone there prided themselves on being as fringe as possible with their taste, being as fringe as possible with their political views. So there was it was very it was definitely something I would write when I was 18, but it was in reaction to that kind of context.
Okay, so I'm really kind of cool. I have this picture that is like really old of you playing a bass, and you look so much like you look so young. It's hilarious. That
Yeah.
picture might get leaked eventually. I couldn't actually listen to music because MySpace didn't actually let me. I tried to. There's a bunch of songs up there.
Yeah, it was all
So
bad.
well, I was just gonna ask how many gigs did you? Because I actually played in a band too in college. I thought our band was actually pretty good.
Okay.
So like the
Well, what'd
biggest
you play?
crowd. I played guitar and I did some like backup vocals. I think our biggest crowd that we opened for was like maybe like 300 people, 250 people, something like that. It was a lot of fun.
That's a very big crowd.
It was pretty good. I might be over exaggerating that, but it felt like that, and it was a packed venue. So
if it can look anything above 100, then I think that's impressive for anything.
So, what types of venues did you play at? Did you do? Did you actually get gigs? Did you get to play in front of
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, we mostly played. I think like the most fun gigs we did were like house parties and frat
Mhm.
parties. Because like you'd get a lot of people in there who were like excited to be there. It's a really good crowd that's
Yeah.
really drunk and just wants to dance. And we do most, I'd say if we played like for an hour or so, we do 95% covers. So we do like Blink-182 songs, things that
Mhm.
people we knew that in the age range of people that would be at the party, they'd be like, oh man, all the small things, haven't heard that in years. Then we play one or two originals, and those were a lot of fun. I mean, we played a few bars in town as well, but those were, I think, a bit less fun because one, people had to get there, so it was a little less, rowdy. And then two, just like playing at the frats and playing at the we played Music House one night, which was really fun. And I think the crowd that you get is like really opted into the scenario. So it was fun doing that.
I can kind of agree with that. So I actually did like jazz music too, and then rock music. I always preferred to, because I was in like jazz band too. I always preferred rock music over like anything else, just because of the way the crowd interacted. And so like we would always start off our set with Sublime by Santeria by Sublime.
Yeah.
Because like the first like 4 notes, like everyone just starts like screaming, and it's so iconic. Did you have moments like that where you'd lay into a song and then like you'd get the kickback of like the crowd?
Yeah, we'd always close with Champagne Supernova by Oasis, and it's another one of those songs. Just kind of like it starts in the open chords, wow, and then everyone kind of starts singing along, and that was always really fun to do.
Okay, so I'm kind of excited to. There's a lot of fun stuff here as we're gonna kind of get into. So obviously, I can't pronounce your college's name. Wesleyan,
yeah.
Wesleyan is in Connecticut. Are you actually from Connecticut?
Yeah, I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, most well known for a train station that will get you between New York and Boston.
Imagine being known for a train station as your most prominent feature.
Well, I think probably after the Office, the Office of the show had a branch in Stamford, so I think that was a big moment for us, but not too much else going on.
Okay, so how big is Stamford? Because I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest, but like how big is Stamford?
It's like, so I grew up in Springdale, which is like a small little like side of it. Stamford itself is a pretty big city. Like, I don't know. I mean, I could Wikipedia. I think it's like probably in the hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
But like the area I grew up in is very much like countryside, like kind of not big city environment.
Okay. So did you go to a fairly small school then?
Yeah, my graduating class of middle school was like 40 people.
Okay, that's actually really small. That's relatively close to actually the same thing that I had like in the Midwest. Was a very, very, you knew everyone.
Yeah,
so,
whether or not you wanted to, you knew everyone.
Yes, and everyone knew you, whether or not you wanted them to. So kind of looking at that, do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, actually. So my older brother, John Spector, works in the Overwatch League as director of something. Recently, did an interview with Malik, and I actually joked with him. I was like, you were the second Spector brother to get interviewed by Malik on camera. And then our older sister actually teaches music at a small school in Massachusetts.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I was actually going to ask you if you're related to the John Spector, or if that was just a most fortunate curse of like the common last name.
No, that's my older brother.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense then. So music seems to be something that's very prevalent in your family. Is that true for like all of you? And how did you guys get there? Is it just something you guys all gravitated towards, or?
My sister's the only one who's really talented. We don't know why. She actually went to New England Conservatory for school, trained classic opera singer. And I think just growing up, because she was always working on stuff like that, she was always singing in the house, and so it kind of rubbed off on me. And I, in the 7th grade, was like, I want to be cool. What do cool kids do? Cool kids play the guitar. And I still have guitars here in Los Angeles, and have a bass here as well. I think it was just, it was kind of my sister leading the way for all of us and picking it up by osmosis.
Okay. So kind of like that. What do your parents do or did?
They're both psychologists. They're both shrinks.
I'm now going to ask a bunch of questions that are personally similar to me, because actually both of my parents are shrinks as well.
Oh, okay, so you've been damaged too.
Yeah. So which is something you can only really understand if your parents are probably shrinks, that you became a walking case study forevermore of your parents, right? So
how do you feel about that? Just became like this mantra it became a meme eventually. Like once I got old enough to explain to them how damaging it was to have that asked every time, but at the beginning it was just kind of reality.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that my parents would say, like, how does this make you feel? But also one of the things they'd be like, oh, Blake, how do you want to critically think your way through this? And I'd be like, I hate you. That's what I want to, I hate you. I want to come in the middle of the night with an axe and kill you. That is how I want to critically think my way through this.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of good intentions, but not always the best execution.
So I would say that it was fairly prevalent, obviously, for my career path moving forward, because I obviously got a degree in psychology and stuff like that, which was maybe just me utilizing all these skills that I was taught growing up. I was being like farmed. I was like instead of being like trained to be like an assassin, I was like being farmed to work in psychology as a child.
The classic Midwest story, right?
Yeah, right. Was there some benefit though? Because I know there was definitely some benefit for me, especially like when I look towards like relationships and stuff like that. I think that as I got older, a lot of those skills became easier to utilize. Was there some benefit for your parents being shrinks that kind of helped you comparative to other people that you knew?
I mean, look, there's definitely some upside. I think you mentioned the critical thinking thing. It was a classic thing. I'd be like, "Hey, mom and dad, like, why is something this way?" And it would be so simple that, and they'd be like, "Well, why do you think it's that way? Well, why do you think something's like this?" And I remember being really annoyed as a kid because like I would be asking like, why can't we go to this thing? Which is, it's not a rhetorical question. It's like a very specific answer to it, right? And rather than tell me any information, they'd make me think about it. And it was something that annoyed me as a kid, but I think it's part of what led me to, kind of be a bit more analytical about things, which obviously has led to the career that I have. So I appreciate that. I think as far as like, social stuff, it's impossible to know, right? I mean, there's no but for world where your parents were not shrinks, where you can say, oh, I'd be like, I wouldn't know how to interact with people this way. So it's a tough question to answer in that regard. But I do think a lot of the kind of curiosity and critical thinking that I have comes from that just training.
Yeah, I like it. Like Pavlov. You have like dog training, like where they do the little biscuits. Yeah. Basically, we got that kind of growing up. So kind of looking at school, right? Like right now, I've always known you as like kind of a very charismatic person who's very easy to talk to people. Has it always been the case like that? Have you always been that person who just easily is able to open up and talk to everyone?
No. I in high school I was like a bit of a loner actually. Definitely struggle with a lot of social anxiety. It's still do to this day. Just I've discovered drinking, which is a helpful thing for it. Hold on one second. Hey, Gordon, take this. Go over there. No, I had a lot of trouble connecting to people in high school, and I think for me, like the big pivotal moment was I got to college, and I can brag on Wesleyan, all day about being kind of intentionally fringe or really hipstery, but the nice thing about that place was that, every conversation you started with someone, they gave you the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. They wanted to get to know you. And so in that environment where you could literally just start a conversation with anyone, there was a lot of communal. Sorry.
Your cat is hilarious.
Yeah. All right. There was a lot of communal space. And so, a lot of the friends I made at Wesleyan were just, like Sam, a friend of mine who I actually played music with, like we met in line for a falafel. And it's just, it's not the same regular small talk you have, like, oh, hey, how you doing? Like, what's your major? It's just like, man, like, like you're wearing a baseball shirt. Like, let's talk for like an hour about what it was like to be in Little League and how those moments were so magical for us. And so I think that environment really helped me kind of dive in with people in a bigger way because it was just kind of the norm there and helped me learn how to do that.
Okay, so you mentioned being kind of a loner through high school. What was elementary school like for you?
Oof. God, Blake. What was elementary school like? It was great. The small town thing, where you kind of know everyone, was really nice. I every year, you move up a grade, and rather than be in this strange environment with strange people, like the teacher already knows you because I had older siblings, so like, oh, you're Jonathan's little brother, like, and it just the sense of familiarness with everyone around was really nice. The school I went to was beautiful. It was, a 2-minute drive, 15-minute walk from my house. So the sense of community there was really, really strong, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Did you ever get, did people ever comment about your parents being shrinks? Was that ever something that came up? Because I feel like if I was a kid and I was looking to make fun of someone, I feel like that'd just be an easy target.
I was a bit of a heavier kid, so there were some more obvious things to rag on me for. So I don't think people, if someone wanted to make fun of me, that the list was long enough that it never quite got down to parents' occupation. But I'm assuming you did.
Not actually. My parents. So funny thing about me is my parents actually didn't become shrinks until I was a little bit older. Because like my dad, I actually went to school with my dad. My mom was a shrink first because she went back to school when I was probably like 12, 13. But my dad didn't go back to college until I was like 15. And so like his last year of like college was like my first year of college, which is terribly awkward when you go to the same school as your parent.
Like literally the same school.
Yeah, literally the same school. It was weird.
Okay.
But he was like prepping me way beforehand because he was like starting to learn about things, and my mom was really
cool.
big on that. Yeah, it's not cool. Don't go to school with your parent. It's fucking weird. Okay,
It sounds cool.
It sounds cool in theory. So, but no, so I didn't really ever get made fun of. One of the things I actually got made fun of kind of growing was, I don't know if a lot of people know this, I was actually born in Okinawa, Japan, because my parents were military. And so I used to actually get made fun of that all the time, especially like when we were learning about history and like Pearl Harbor bombing and stuff like that. That was like one of the big things that I got made fun of. That was quite terrifying, terrible. Like
Isn't
everything.
it amazing like how like there's something so creative about the cruelty of kids? Because it's like, as an adult, I would never like you tell me you're born in Japan, I would never think to make fun of you for Pearl Harbor. But it's just like, you take a child and they find it. They find that one little spot.
Yeah, it's really weird how they also get to that point and like get to the point of being like intentionally cruel to people. Because I feel like most people, like, they're taught that, like, someone has to teach them to some degree, like, why are you being cruel to people to a degree, I think. Like a good example is like racism. If you were to take kids, like, kids don't really understand what racism is until like a certain point in their life. So it's weird.
But I think of the cruelty thing, and I'm speaking out of my ass, and you actually have training in this kind of field, so you could correct me when I'm saying something stupid. But I think of the kind of cruelty that is like, hey, you were born in Japan, Pearl Harbor. I think of that as like touching the stove, where a kid's going to always push whatever limits they don't know yet, right? And it's just with touching the stove, it's like, oh shit, that was hot, I should not do that again. The cruelty thing, it's like, oh, like, if you let's say I made that joke to you and you started crying or it clearly affected you, like, oh crap, like that made someone else feel awful, I shouldn't be doing this.
See, I will say my school was intentionally mean. Like, like their goal was to be as hard and like as cruel as possible. I always tell a story that like when I was like a little bit older and like I think I was a freshman, I remember a kid getting his like face bashed in with like an ice chunk. Like intentionally. So like I didn't go to it wasn't like a gangster school. I think I was like white trash kind of bad. So
great. Well,
I know,
congrats
right?
on getting out.
I know, right? I did. I managed to do it. So kind of looking at school for you, elementary school, were you still quite a loner there, or did you kind of connect with people?
No, I had a lot of friends. I think again, it was a situation in which the people that I finished 8th grade with were 90% the same people that I started preschool with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's just at that level of early on interaction with people, it's impossible to not have friends. I think like you know people since you're 3 years old.
Yeah.
It's a de facto just automatic sense of community. So I had a lot of friends in middle school, and I think I didn't earn any of them, but
were you big into sports or anything like that?
Yeah, I played on 3 baseball teams a year growing up. So I did fall ball in the town league, I did spring in the town league, and I did spring at school.
Okay, so you're a huge baseball fan. Do you like competitive or like professional baseball too?
I did up until probably I was like 16. I had this MLB.TV package where you could watch every single game online because I didn't get the Red Sox, my favorite team. I didn't get like at Nesson, which is their channel where I was. So like I subscribed to this thing. I watched every game of the season. It's like 162 games, so it's a big commitment. And then probably around the time I got to high school, I just kind of you kind of change a bit in what your interests are, and I stopped following it. But it was a big part of my life for a while.
Okay. So what happened when you got into high school? Like, it seems like there was almost like a dynamic shift of something. You mentioned that in 8th grade you knew everyone. Did you go to a school where you didn't know everyone?
Yeah, so I went to boarding school up in Massachusetts, and it was, the quality of education was incredible. Like the teachers that I had were oftentimes better than like college professors that I had in terms of, their ability to kind of engage you with the material and stuff. But it was far away from my family, far away from like the small town I grew up in where I knew everybody. And I think that, when the friends you have are people you've known since you were like shitting your pants, it it can be hard to meet new people who don't know anything about you, and then people aren't giving you the automatic benefit of the doubt, right? And so it can be a bit jarring to go into a situation where someone knows nothing about you, and you could say something stupid and rather be like, oh, that's just Ethan being Ethan. Like, hey, that guy said something stupid. I don't like him. And so I think that was a pretty jarring transition.
Did you want to go to boarding school?
No, very much so not.
Okay, what was that conversation like?
The conversation was like, because of the kind of like, rural is too strong of a word. I know you're from the Midwest, so like my rural is probably not your rural, but there wasn't a great like bus system for this like the local schools. So both my parents worked full time. They wouldn't be able to drive me to and from whatever things I needed to go to. And they were like, hey, like, you're going to boarding school. And I was like, no, like, I love it here. I want to stay here. And, looking back on it, I was obviously being a bit of a brat. Like they had certain things that they needed to do, and they were still, sacrificing a lot to give me a top-notch education, which I'm really grateful for now. But at the time I was a bit upset about it.
Okay, so you end up finding out that you have to leave towards boarding school. I take it that you just lived at the boarding school, right? Like that's how most boarding schools
Yeah,
work.
it was full-time boarder. Yeah.
Okay, full-time boarder. I like the way that sounds. Holy God. So you end up going to this new boarding school. When you first get there, what does it feel like to you?
It felt a little bit like it felt a little bit harsh. I think it's not that it was a very nice school, right? Like in terms of facilities and the quality of education and stuff, but it still was like, getting there, the bathroom, for example, like, I was 14, 15 at the time. And like, there's 18-year-olds who I'm like sharing like a bathroom with now, like full time. And it's just like, it was a bit weird because I'd only ever lived with my family, and, I was still pretty young, and I definitely felt a lot of homesickness early on there.
Okay. And so did that affect the way that you kind of went about school, the way that you interacted with people, the way that you kind of performed?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I became a bit of a loner early on. Like I think I had my hair like real long, like down to here long in the front, and like I'd put it over my eyes so I didn't have to like look at anyone. I was very edgy. And I think part of that persona was, in middle school, I'd always been like really, really quick. I was really good in terms of grades and stuff. And then I get to high school, and it's just like everything. I think part of the persona that I wanted to have as a kid who didn't care about things, because like that, it's easier to be, if you're someone who really cares about things and you don't have a lot of friends, like that's a very vulnerable spot to be in. But if you're someone who doesn't care, it's like, oh, like I don't have friends by choice.
Yeah.
So I think part of that was to disengage a little bit academically. And so I'd show up late to class, like even though I had nothing to do, right? It wasn't like I was like out like with friends doing something. I would just like wait in my room, like watch a video or something, and be like, oh, okay, it's 10 minutes past the time, I'm going to go now. Which, obviously is very dumb looking back on it, but it's kind of part of what I did.
Yeah. Okay. So did your parents ever bring that up to you? Like, did they ever find out about that stuff and be like, the sit down with my psychologist parents who are strengths and are...
Yeah. Okay. So like I don't know if you watch Scrubs, but there's this concept that they bring up about how doctors are always the most anxious parents because their kid coughs, and they don't see a cough. What they see is 1,000 patients that have died from whatever disease it is. I think with my parents, my mom's a child clinical psychologist, and she's been seeing patients for 35 years. So inevitably in that time, she's seen kids who have disengaged academically and then gone on to become, drug dealers or whatever other, think about the worst case scenario for your child. So I think for them, with the best intentions in the world, they were more worried. They saw those paths kind of appearing before them for this kid that they had raised since, and so I think for them it was very shocking. And we actually had a series of kind of like big fights about it my junior year of high school, where they were like, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to college? Like, do you want to do any of this stuff? Does any of this even matter to you? And of course it did. I mean, of course I wanted to do all those things. And at the time it was definitely like a very tense point for me and my family, but we worked through it, and I ended up going to a pretty good school for college. So I'm happy that they confronted me, even if it was a little bit over dramatic. Because of their experience with other patients.
Yeah. So kind of looking at high school, you mentioned that you were always late on time. Did you still perform well in school?
I was the kid who would do really well on tests and do really poorly on homework. Which I know is, it's like, oh, he's so cool. He doesn't have to try. And so, I was an idiot. And I, even when I was in class, like pretending not to pay attention because I had my bangs over my eyes, of course, I'd still be looking and learning and caring about the things. I ended up actually I did pretty okay. I think I graduated with like a 3.3 or something from high school. But yeah, I didn't do that terribly.
Okay, so you mentioned that baseball was a big thing leading up to high school. Did you kind of drop all sports when you started going to boarding school?
No, I switched to I was actually tri-varsity in boarding school. Which means nothing because it was such a small school. But I did cross country in the fall, wrestling in the winter, and track in the spring.
Okay, so how does that work? Being involved in all these different sports, but being a loner the entire time.
Well, think about those sports, Blake.
I mean, they're all individual.
Yeah, they're all individual.
But even individual sports, a lot of times you're still working with people. You're working with coaches, and
yeah, you have a coach, but they're minimal contact, right? I mean, so you have to understand. Like, I'm assuming it was the same way for most people, but sports was a mandatory part of the curriculum in high school, at least for us. And so it was, you have to do something. Just like I had to go to class, like even if I showed up late. And so for those things, for the most, those are sports where in wrestling, like in for track meets, of course, like the way it works is there's some aggregate score, right? Ethan Spector doesn't win the wrestling meet. The school wins the wrestling meet, but it's still kind of an aggregate of different people, and there's never a time where you're relying on anyone else for your individual performance. And so especially, I'm a bit of a smaller guy. I'm like 5'8", and one of the things I liked about cross country, track, and wrestling is that, no matter your size, like wrestling literally has weight categories, right? So you're automatically matched up against someone with similar kind of stature to you. And so I like that. I liked it was just kind of about like how much effort you could put in. And it was, again, like it was entirely based on your performance.
So did you really gravitate towards the like competition? Were you still someone who was like hyper competitive, or were you just kind of in the middle?
I was hyper competitive in the worst way, which is like I cared a lot about the outcome, but I didn't put in the effort to get good. So it's the dark side of competitive. It's you know what it is? It's the person who's hard stuck in platinum and is just like gets so upset every time they lose a game, but they never think about how to improve. They never go to the practice range. They never, watch videos. They just continue grinding their head at solo queue.
Okay,
basically
so yeah. So we actually are I think we're actually the same age, which means that some video games would have been coming out probably around the same time. Like League of Legends, I imagine, was probably out when you were in college, unless you were on really early on. But for me, it was like my second year of college, I think. So when did you start to get into like video games, and more specifically like esports? When did that start to become part of your life?
Yeah, it was a friend of mine, Tim, actually. My game in high school is Halo 3 and MW2. Like, and I grinded those games. I was ranked 50 in Halo 3, just putting it out there, lone wolf. And it, I had like a MacBook or something at the time. So PC gaming was not on the radar for me. And then, I get to college, and one of my friends, Tim, is like a big PC gamer, introduced me to League my sophomore year. At the time, it was like Riot didn't have an official Mac client, but they did have like an ex-employee or something who had like a homebrew like spin-up version of it, which is like, and the funny thing, I don't know if you remember, but like the patches would drop, and it would take like a day or two for the Mac patch to drop because the guy was doing a really good job, but he had to go and make it all work. And so just kind of through that friendship, I discovered PC gaming. And immediately with League, I mean, I when I was a kid, I played Warcraft 3 and the kind of the Dota All Stars mod. And so I picked up League, and I was immediately like, oh, this is great. Now I'm actually an adult with like the facilities to understand like the metagame and things like that. And maybe a month or two into playing it, I walked into Tim's room one day, and I think there was the Taipei Assassins like in the finals or something of season 2 or whatever it was. And I'm sitting down like, people are watching them play video games. I did the exact stereotypical reaction to it, and from then on, I think that was a few months after that was the first year of the LCS, like when they actually were doing the league format, and I watched every game, and I just loved it. I think in a lot of ways, I mentioned it being a kid and following baseball really closely. I think I think the competition aspects of of baseball and organized sports were always really interesting to me, but it felt inaccessible because at a certain point, when you get old enough, like I kind of physically dropped out of baseball just based on size and like ability. Like I'm not an athlete by any measure. And so getting into esports, like I was always good at video games, learning about this high level competition in something that I could potentially have competed in myself, I think was really, really appealing.
Okay, so let's take a step back here, right? Obviously, you went to university. You're finishing up high school, and you're kind of like you have this huge conversation about like colleges and stuff like that with your parents. Like, what do you want to do with your life? The kind of the stereotypical, what are you gonna do with your life moving forward? That I feel like everyone has. But kind of looking at that, like you're getting close to graduating high school. What makes you think, you know what I want to do? I want to study economics.
It was. I think most people kind of have a similar story. I had a really good econ teacher in high school. She made the subject come to life in a really cool way. I think I was always really into math and science, but I also liked social science a lot. Like I took the stereotypical like high school psychology thing where you learn about things that seem obvious to you, and then you're like, oh, I always knew that, but of course you didn't, and you learned it there. And I kind of like that econ blended the two. There was a lot of math involved. There was a lot of kind of logic and stuff, but at the same time, it also incorporated, labor economics is all about kind of how people en masse will react to different, economic forces and things like that. And so it just kind of appealed to, I think, you kind of went full on following after the parents with the psychology thing. And I went, more social science than I probably would have. I think is how they affected me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what makes you decide that you want to go to Wesleyan?
It was the best school I got into. Just candidly, I got, not, I'm going to sound like a douche for saying this, but I did, I had pretty poor grades or pretty okay grades, but I, got a perfect score on the SAT. And so I was in this weird situation where a lot of mid-tier schools, would accept me because, I had those really good test scores. And so it would boost their stats or whatever. But then I wasn't getting into a lot of the top tier schools because of the grades. And Wesleyan, which is, a pretty good school, even though it's small, was kind of the one school in that tier above that was willing to give me a chance. I went there for an interview. I sat down and I talked to the interviewer and actually had a really similar to this really candid conversation about what happened. I was like, hey, like I had a tough time and I disengaged and I probably shouldn't have, and I still really want to do this. And they took a chance on me. So I, took a chance on them.
Okay. So you're going to Wesleyan. I cannot say that name to save my God blessed life.
Okay, so I'm going to help you for a second. John Wesley founded the school.
Yeah.
Wesleyan.
Okay, Wesleyan.
Say Wesley.
Okay, Wesleyan. Okay, that's a little bit easier. If I remember that, we'll be good. So how far away is this from home?
Oh, like 45 minutes.
Okay, so it's not that far away.
No.
Was your boarding school actually?
Yeah, so the farthest away I lived from my parents, between high school and college was in high school. And it gets my dad actually worked in New Haven, Connecticut, which is like, so Connecticut's like, it's like the square with a little nub. Like my family lived down in the nub. Wesleyan's like here, New Haven's like here. So my dad would like pop over for lunch and, I'd see him like a bunch.
Okay, so you never really got to like escape the parents fully then. You weren't like so far away. Was that a good thing for you or do you think a bad thing?
I think it was a really good thing. I needed a lot of help in my life. Like I joke with my parents, like if we were back in cave days, like I would have, you would have thrown me to the wolves because at every stage of my life, like, high school, middle school, even up till now, like I just needed a lot of support. I have a ton of respect for people who bootstrap, like lifted themselves up. I was carried every step of the way. And, I'm not proud of that, but it is what it is. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to stay so proximate to my family because I did need a lot of help. Every aspect of my life.
Okay, now you're living in LA, obviously, which is probably the farthest you've ever lived from your family. Is that really hard on you? The fact that you don't have this support network that you're so used to relying on?
It is a bit. Both my siblings actually have young kids, and so I'm feeling the West Coast uncle problem. I see my nieces in snapshots where they're just, every time I see them, they're a different person, right? It's like, you used to be a little ball that couldn't talk, and now you're running around asking me questions. and it's amazing and it's really cool, and they're both lovely, but it feels a little bit like, I don't know if you're the same way, but like, I had the relatives who lived near us,
Mm-hmm.
who had a real relationship with growing up, and then you have the relatives who live far away, and it's, they're lovely people, and you see them once or twice, maybe every few years, and you have great interactions, but you don't have a real relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being the one member of my family who's out west right now, I think is a bit tough. But I mean, at the same time, I feel lucky that I kind of built up a community here of people that I feel really close with. There's some friends from college who are out here, people in esports who haven't left yet, who are here. That's been helpful. But I long term, I'm looking to go back.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of makes sense. So you're going through college. One of the cool things about college is something I kind of came up for, and I kind of wanted you to go into a little bit. You were actually given something that's called a White Prize for advanced undergraduate study in economics. Is there anything special about that?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. This is yeah. I TA'd a lot for the department. I worked on 3 different research projects with professors. One of the cool things about Wesleyan is that it's a university technically, which means it has a grad program.
Yeah.
But the graduate program I think is like 80 people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's spread out over a lot of different subjects, right? So when a professor at Wesleyan wants to do research, they have to use undergrad students. So you get a lot of opportunities that you wouldn't get at a bigger university. So I worked with a lot of professors on various projects, and I think because of that, it was awarded the prize.
Okay. That's pretty cool. I did see some of your research stuff. I didn't understand any of it. Did you feel like you ever did research that was like, at least for you or like society, like at least somewhat changing in the way that people might look at things?
No. The one project I worked on that was really cool was it was sociology. Actually, professor looked at do you know the Booker Mann Prize for Fiction?
No.
It's like it's the Emmys for fiction as far as notoriety and stuff goes. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, we did this. My professor had this idea that if you looked at the identity of the author,
Mm-hmm.
that you could do a pretty good prediction of who was going to win. So every year they have something called the shortlist, which is similar to nominees for like an award show.
Yeah.
Let's call it like 10 books that are on the shortlist and then one winner. And what he found was that if you take just the subset of shortlisted books, you can kind of predict pretty accurately who's going to win based on author identity as opposed to anything with the book. Which, and this was back in 2012. And I think obviously now there's, some broader discussions to be had about it, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know what, it's one of those pieces of research that's like very academic because there's no action plan afterwards. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about it over tea or something. But it's not like we're going to go out and make policy based on it.
Do you think that's good? Like that type of research, kind of looking at the research that is just like to be discussed over, or do you think that it's virtually useless? Like, are we just living in a society that's like, oh, hey, we have so much free time, we can just do this random research about things that will literally impact nothing at all? Or do you think that there needs to be more impactful research done?
It's a really good question, Blake. I think schools that receive public grants for research probably have a responsibility to. I mean, there's a lot of need in the world, and I think there is government subsidization of the arts, which doesn't if you think about people who are hungry, music's not going to make them less hungry, but there is a societal value to having fine arts, and there's a societal value to having progression of knowledge. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really hard question.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I know, right? Like I told you, this is different. That's what you get. Yeah. So another thing I kind of want to talk about is I would say that you're someone who's very vocal, at least vocal comparative to a lot of people who I know, and at least your belief systems. You're not scared to say what you kind of believe in or uphold the values that you have. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we talked about a bit about our parents and the annoying parts of them saying like, why do you feel that way? But I think a side product of it is that you're taught to believe that your view on something is important, right? If someone asks why do you think why do you think this is the way that it is, they're inherently saying, I want to know your opinion on this, and I care about your opinion on this. And so I think probably that made me think my takes on things are a little bit more important than they were, and kind of carried through the rest of life.
Okay, so have you been someone who's always been like publicly outspoken, someone who like is willing to go to things or to push for a belief system?
Yeah, despite the blip, like other than the blip in high school when I really was kind of like receding
Yeah.
from the world, for the most part, yeah. I mean, like at my old job in Boston, I was kind of the person who'd speak up first. Like if there's something broken in the break room and like no one really wanted to bother about it, I'd be the annoying person saying, "Hey, coffee machine's been broken for a month. Like,
Mhm.
why is nothing happening about it?" I do feel I feel very comfortable with confrontation, so I think
Mhm.
oftentimes I'm one of the first to speak up in those situations.
Okay, so obviously we work in the world of esports, which is entertainment, and it involves huge personalities. Okay, do you think that more people should be doing more in order to speak up for certain things in society, such as like political statements or political value systems, things like that? Do you think that people are inherently responsible to utilize those followings in some sort of way?
No, no, I don't. I think if you look at like a lot of the players in the Overwatch League, they've built up followings over the last 3 or 4 years. The people who have followed them, the people who have supported them, they support them as people, but they're there for their esports content.
Hmm.
And I'm not the kind of person to say like stay in your lane. Absolutely not. Like you are entitled to speak your mind on anything. But I don't think that who was there said like I'm not your idol? Like it was a big controversy in season one. Like yeah, these are people who are playing video games. I mean, to bring it back to baseball, one of my favorite players growing up was Manny Ramirez on the Red Sox. Terrible person. Like he was the kind of guy like in games of baseball, oftentimes there's foul balls hitting the stands, and like occasionally they'll hit someone, and the game will be paused, right? Because like basically the paramedics come and figure out if
Yeah.
everyone's okay. Manny Ramirez is the type of guy like all the baseball players stand there like standing up, like waiting, like very worried. Manny Ramirez goes in the dugout and like puts his hat on his head and sleeps. Really bad guy. One of my favorite players, though, because he played on my favorite team and was like a real power hitter. And I think there has to be that separation for fandom. I think in esports it's harder because there's this deeper connection that the fans have to players because of streaming and just the nature of the engagement where it kind of started out as a smaller thing. So fans sometimes feel more entitled and do get a deeper look into players' lives. So it can feel more than just like, hey, that guy plays baseball. That's all I care about. I don't care if he's a jerk.
Hmm.
But I don't think they're responsible at all to use their platforms for anything other than what they were built to do for.
Okay. Okay, it's just very interesting because like we obviously have like big name. I would almost say like anti personalities that are out there. Looks like a good example is like Thorn. A lot of times people view him as like just a villain, and some of his I like a lot of his work. I don't always agree with his opinions, but like he's very kind of polarizing out there.
Just to be clear, like Thorin doesn't agree with a lot of Thorin's opinions. Like
No.
he being a freelance content creator,
Yeah.
like yourself, like he's an extremely smart guy
Yes.
who, if you think about the number of esports that he actually covers intelligently, like that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a
It's
lot.
crazy to follow those scenes as well as he does and be able to talk about it intelligently. And I think he's very smart about whenever a topic comes about, he's going to have one of the leading opinions on it. And if the way to do that is to have the unpopular opinion, that's what he'll do, whether or not he believes it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So, kind of looking at college, you ended up graduating college. You finished it in 4 years, which kudos to you. I did not finish mine in 4 years. It took me 5, unfortunately.
Were you working through it?
I did. I worked throughout all of college. So,
I mean, respect on that. That's a lot harder than what I did.
So kind of looking at that, you graduate college. Did you have a job lined up right away? Did you know what you wanted to do? Did you have something that you were like, oh my God, this is what I'm super passionate about. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Yes, no, no. I had a job lined up. I worked in economic consulting, which is, oof. It's hard to explain. Basically, it's doing data analytics for big legal cases. So, Morgan Stanley gets sued for writing shitty loans. Their defense case is very often not going to be, hey, we didn't do that. They're never going to say that because they did. What they're going to be like is, yeah, we did that, but like it wasn't as bad as you think. And here's some like very detailed, like high level statistical analysis to prove that we're right. And so their recruiting cycle actually happens in the fall. So I had my job lined up November of my senior year. So I'd accepted. I had full position fully ready in Boston, and it wasn't necessarily something that I was super passionate about, but it fit my skill set. The people who worked at that company were really intelligent and, had a really good mindset, and it paid well. And it was something that, one of the fights that I had with my mom in college was that I was very addicted to League, and I was Masters in North America, and Challenger in Latin America North. And I was trying to say, Mom and Dad, I think I want to try and go pro. And my mother very calmly goes and gets a copy of the most recent tuition bill and puts it down in front of me and says, "You're going to go work a regular job. And if after 2 years you're sure you don't want to do it, then you can do whatever you want. But for 2 years, you're gonna make good on this that we did for you." And so, I would not say that economic consulting was my passion that I really wanted to do, but it was a good job, and it was something that was very safe.
Okay, so it was very safe. So when you say addicted to League, how addicted to League were you? I definitely might have failed the semester largely because of League.
I probably played 4 to 5 hours a day, maybe, and oftentimes more than that. I think I definitely have an addictive personality in general. I'm lucky enough that that's never gone to anywhere dark, with any of the more insidious things out there. But League still, and Overwatch, anything with a ladder system, you could if someone made a ladder for brushing your teeth, I'd be in the bathroom brushing my teeth 10 hours a day. You know what I mean? If there was a global rating system out there somehow. And so I grinded a lot of League in college.
Okay, so you mentioned that you were spending 4 to 5 hours a night. You were also in a fraternity. I don't know what type of fraternity it was. I didn't get to looking that up. Was it a social or was it a honorary?
That one you actually got wrong. I was never in a frat. I was going to pledge a frat and got into a fight with one of the brothers the night before the pledge week started.
Oh,
and
okay.
Was uninvited from the pledge week, actually.
Okay, maybe this is a different organ. Were you in some sort of what's Omicron Delta Epsilon?
That is an honor society for the
honor society.
Economics.
Okay, honor society. So you were in some social aspects, at least a little bit. I did get that one wrong because I saw the Greek letters and I. Probably. And I could see you being in a fraternity. I think okay, maybe not. Well, we'll see. So kind of looking at that, you're playing League. Did you ever really get out much during college? If you're spending 4 to 5 hours a night, I can't imagine that you're thinking, I'm going to play League and then I'm going to go out and do this other thing and then get back the next day.
No, I was very social. I did a lot.
You didn't sleep?
I didn't sleep very much, and I would say, I worked every semester I was in college, but only about 8 hours a week. Okay. So not anything full time, just kind of basically to have food and beer money, right? And I went out a lot. It's just that I think I was very, very, very efficient with my non-fun time. I'd be basically in class taking notes and then also working on the assignment for the next day. So I kind of leveraged the ability to multitask a lot and created some more hours in the day.
Okay. So kind of looking at when you mentioned you really wanted to go into this path of very much logic instead of what your parents were, more of the abstract, which is kind of what a lot of psychology is. And you were really addicted to League. Did gambling ever come up related to League?
No, only because it wasn't really available in any form. I did not know about esports betting in any capacity. I didn't know. Vegas was across the country. I think we have what's that place in Jersey or New York? That's Atlantic City, and a few casinos here and there. It was never a vice that was available to me, so I don't think it was ever a vice that was on my parents' mind.
Okay, so you looked at that. I knew because I had Baroy on the show, who's another analyst type, and he did a lot of betting related.
Yeah, but although I think he was, he did quite well on that. He told me that he funded.
Yeah, he did. He did very, very well with that. And I was just like, I could see Beezy knows numbers pretty well. I wouldn't be that surprised if he decided to dip his fingers into the gambling world.
If I had known about it, I probably would have, and I would have made a lot less money than Baroy. He's a lot smarter than I am.
He's a really smart person. Kind of looking at you mentioned your job, kind of leaving and working in Boston and doing data analyst work. What does that actually include? When any plebeian like myself hears that, I'm like, What type of stuff is he doing that is actually useful? Like how does this translate into things that I can describe?
Um, a lot of it is ingest and cleaning, to be honest. So like, which doesn't it's not the sexiest part, but like a lot of data analytics work is like someone hands you a PDF, right? And it's 1,000 pages long. And they're like, hey, like turn this into data. And so there's some options of things to do. You can basically like, okay, well, I could just go through every page, hand transcribe everything, put it in there. I could write a program to basically like turn the drawing and stuff into actual text, and then do spot checking for it. Once it's in there, what other data sets do I need to merge it with? Do I need to like go get like global macro data to actually inform this information? So a lot of it is actually just cleaning and ingesting large data sets. Even when things don't come in PDF form, no company is ever going to, like, the function that a company records data in is not for a future lawsuit, right? It's for some operational purpose. So even if they're really, really clean and smart about their bookkeeping, it's never going to be in the right format for you to do legal data analytics on it. So no matter what the process is, there's always some transformation that's to happen. And then a lot of it's, kind of doing work to, I guess the layman terms, we just establish relationships or lack of relationships between different things. I use the example of Morgan Stanley writing bad loans. A lot of what we do is kind of sampling analysis. So you'd say like, hey, like, you can't analyze every single loan because there's millions of them. Let's take a group of 100 of them, do this analysis on it, and then using statistics kind of show why it would be representative of this group of a million. And then the final step of it would be, and this is the hard part in my opinion, is the average. We were told to assume that the average juror in the cases that we were going to help with the trial on, that the average juror had a 9th grade education. And so you're taking these very complicated things that are over my head, by the way. Like the partners at the company I was at were these brilliant economic minds. You have to take these things and make them digestible for the average person. So there's a lot of, if you think about the start of a case and the end of a case, you climb up the mountain of complexity, and then at the end you have to bring it all the way back down. So it's a very holistic process, but definitely not something that I was incredibly passionate about.
Okay, so how long did you stay up at this company until Fusion?
Yeah, I was there from 2014 when I graduated until the fall of 2017 when I accepted this position.
Okay, so what was daily life while you were working at this position like? Was it mostly just like a very much routine? You'd go to work, you do your work, you come home, you'd play League?
It was a consulting firm, which meant that the firm made money off billable hours.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, there would be some weeks where I'd get there at 9, I'd leave at 5, and I'd go do normal things with normal friends. But there were a lot of weeks where it was closer to 80, 90 hours of work. And those are the weeks where you get home, you eat, you eat the salad that was in the fridge in the morning, and then you go to sleep, and then you wake up and do it again. So I'd say that was not the majority of weeks that I had, but still fairly frequently there'd be a bit of a grind.
So kind of looking at that grind compared to esports, because esports is also a grind. Which one was worse, do you think?
Esports was 1,000 times worse, in just so many different capacities. Esports is way worse.
Okay, so that kind of brings me into the question: do you think that there's an issue with working that many hours, or do you think it's just the standard quote? Do you think that's something that needs to be looked at in esports, or do you think that there's something? Just it is what it is. You either deal with it or you don't join the industry.
I mean, this is a complicated issue. It's not just about the hours. It's about the type of hours. Like when I was working in Boston at Cornerstone, was the name of the company. Like if I had an 80-hour week and I'd get home at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, there would be a really definitive line between the workday and the evening. Even if I only had time to like watch a YouTube video before I went to bed. Oftentimes, like if I'm working that late, like we'd get dinner at the office, and so there would be kind of like, and then you take like a 20-minute break, play some games with friends while you're there. But like for the most part, it was kind of clear what was working, what wasn't. Whereas in esports, like I mean, this as well as I do, but you take a Thursday game that is an 8 o'clock game. Game finishes, you do press at the stadium, then you go home, you're with the team. You sit around, you do some like post game talks, you eat dinner with the team, and it's just like it all blends together so heavily that it's so many hours at work, and it starts to become complicated to even figure out when that work time ended and when your real life time started.
Mm-hmm.
And just broadly, I think it's, I mean, we're not the first people to discuss this. I think, there used to be this perception of, oh, the reason people quit esports young is because of reaction times. Well, no, it's because of burnout.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess to go to a bit of a rant here, it's just like, even the structure of it, where in a given week, we generally have one off day, right? And one, for most of those off days, like especially early on with the Fusion, I didn't really know anyone. So I lived with the coaches. So it's, you're still hanging out with all the same people. But because the off day is like, it's a floating day, it was impossible to make plans with anyone. I don't think in my first, in the stages 1 through 3 of the Fusion, I really actually like did anything, because, you have an off day, maybe it's Tuesday, maybe it's Monday, all your friends are working, you're exhausted, and you didn't have time to really plan anything out because you only found out when the off day would be like the week before or something.
Yeah.
And so what you end up doing, what I ended up doing is just like lo-fi plans. Maybe you go out to a bar, maybe you play some games, and then you go to bed.
Yeah, I will say that was one of the things I think, I really wanted to implement at Gladiators, and this is one of the reasons why I was kind of I did all of our scheduling last year. I mean, I was very much a stickler about like what days we would practice and what day we had off, and we always, except for very rare cases, always took Sunday off. Every single I was like, this is the one day off. I want people to be able to plan. I want people to have some actual time off, and I thought that was really important because it actually provided some semblance of separation. And I definitely want to kind of talk about Burnout, because obviously we both worked season 1. I don't know how much involvement you have with Fusion right now in season 2, or the way that things are. So let's lead into that first. How did you get hired by Fusion? What made them want to pick you up?
There was a little bit of nepotism. I was in the process of applying to business school. I took the GMAT. I was, writing my essays. And, I followed competitive Overwatch. I, followed competitive league and all that. And so I knew about the Overwatch league coming up. My brother was working for the league. And one of his jobs was to help the team staff out. And so I say a little bit of nepotism because like, he just came to me and was like, hey, like, Philly Fusion is the last team to join the league. They're looking for people. I would talk to the owner, Tucker, and he's really interested in having like some sort of data analytics department. Do you want to talk to him? And I said, yeah, of course. I mean, candidly, I had tried and failed to get into esports in many different ways. I think a lot of people who start from the outside know the feeling of like, if you don't know someone, you don't know someone.
Oh yeah.
There's no way in. I applied to Riot at various points. I had, I sent in like some letters of interest to various teams, like for analyst positions. But what I thought was a pretty decent resume. I was always pretty high ranked in whatever I played. And it never worked out because, at least the reason that I say is that, you really have to know people. It's a very like,
did you get interviews industry for other teams or anything? Okay. Cause I interviewed with like CLG, Team Liquid a couple times. For like different, and it never worked out. Like I made it like fairly far into the interview process, but every time there was just always someone else, and I was like, "Fuck."
Yeah, you'll see that they'll hire someone who like worked as like a social media person like for the year before, and it's just like there's definitely this, and I think it's changing with the Overwatch League and kind of the greater professional, like the gentrification of esports, as I would say, is the past 2 or 3 years. But yeah, no. So I'd always dreamed of being involved. Like, just to be honest, like the things that I don't know if, I write a little blog, or at least I did season 1, like doing data analytics stuff. Like I did that for fun with one of my buddies at my old job. We never published anything. We just like sit around like, oh, isn't that cool? Like, isn't that cool that this thing exists? And so my brother told me about the opportunity. I was like, okay, well, I'm in the middle of applying to business school. I'm probably going to do that no matter what. But this would be so interesting to talk to these people.
Yeah.
Had an interview with Tucker, who's our CEO. Had an interview with Kirby, who's was the head coach at the time and now my roommate. And it went really well. And I think they because they're the last team to join. This was in September. They wanted to move quickly, and they made me an offer. And I think I remember like the kind of party line that the phrase that I kept repeating to everyone was like, if I don't do this now, when will I do it?
Yeah.
Your GMAT score, which is a test you have to take to get into business school, like that lasts for 5 years. I said, hey, it's a chance to go live out in LA for a year, do esports. I'll never have to wonder what if. And so with that in mind, and, I had some savings from my job, I figured, why not? Let's go do it.
Mm-hmm. So you get out to LA. What is LA like for you?
Very lonely, very lonely. I got the job October 1st. Was when I was hired. We were told to report to LA by November 1st. That's when everyone's supposed to be there. For those of you who followed Overwatch League Season 1, you remember that Philadelphia Fusion not only was not there November 1st, but we missed preseason and barely made it for the actual season. So I was the only American on the coaching staff or of the players. There were no American players, no American coaching staff.
Was that because of visa issues, or like what was the reason that you guys didn't actually make it on time?
I'm actually not sure if I can even talk about that. To this day, I could check it about that. But let's just say that I was American and I got there first, no problem.
Okay.
And Tucker, the CEO, was obviously American as well, but he was still living in SF at the time. And so I get there November 1st, and I left all my friends behind in Boston. I'd broken my lease to come move out here, and I get here, and it's like slowly as the weeks go by, it's always here like, oh yeah, everyone will be here in a week. It'll be great. And it's just me. You went to our place last year. It's like really up in the mountains, right? Yeah. It's in deep Burbank, and it was just me out there, and there was no team, and that went on for months of just, luckily I had a few friends from college out in Los Angeles, but they lived in the West Side, and just for people out there who've never been to LA, it's like LA long distance is a term because if you live on the opposite side of the city, you'll never see that person. Yeah. And I really was up in, as deep as you can get and still call yourself living in LA. It was very lonely. And there were times when hold on one second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Gordon. Come back in. Let's go. There were times where I was like, oh, I made a terrible mistake. Like I had this really great job and career path back in Boston, and I left to come to LA, and now there's no one here, and I just have all day to go insane. So
were you on like a European schedule then? Because everyone was obviously mostly from like Europe. I imagine you guys were mostly on a European schedule, and that being in PST is like an 8-hour difference, I imagine.
Yeah, we were European, we were Korean, we were East Coast, we were all over the place, and that also definitely made it difficult to like fully engage with the team and to be part of the scrims and a part of that stuff. So it was, even just from like, we had the coaches were actively working during that time and getting scrims with whoever they could, but for a lot of the AL teams, they were like, we don't want to scrim on East Coast servers, we don't want to scrim on EU servers, and so there was just a lot of tumult at the time.
Mm-hmm. So kind of looking at the season starting, you guys make it there just barely. You get into the season. Were you guys at all prepared for the first season of Overwatch? Because I don't think mostly anyone was.
That's a big question. You prepared in terms of like strategy? You prepared in terms of like the lifestyle?
Yeah, like kind of all of it. Like there's obviously the strategy aspect, and if you were prepared on the strategy, it kind of lessened the load on other things because you had less stress, like overall, kind of. So like kind of looking at it like holistically.
No, I don't think we were. I think you said it yourself. Like a lot of teams really weren't. This was a contenders is a tournament, right? Like, yeah. It's a tournament that looks with a large round robin phase at the beginning, or large whatever you want to list phase at the beginning, and that's very different from a league. And you'd have a contenders season, and it would go by very quickly, and it would generally be on one meta, and you would I know a lot of teams would boot camp for it, so they fly all the players out to a temporary place, and then you'd all go home. Whereas this was many months of being in a league-based competition in a city that you don't know, with living with teammates you haven't necessarily played with before. With the Fusion, Joe Meister, Shadowburn, and Carpe had all come from FaZe, and a few of the players had interaction before, but for the most part it was completely separate. Elliot came from United, Hui came from FaZe, Kirby came from 123 and Hammers, and I came from nowhere. And so, we really didn't have any of those pre-existing kind of synergies. I think the LA Valiant was basically Immortals before that, right? They played together, and the Fuel was envious or was envy. So they might have had a little bit more cohesion and strategy going in. But hey, can you stop using my headphones? Thank you. And I think just based on that and the fact that we got there so late, the players flew in a few days before our first match versus Houston. And you need to stop doing that. And the fact that we won that game, I remember being in the dugout and we were all just like, man, it's gonna be so tough to start off a loss. The players were everyone was really frustrated that we got there late,
Yeah.
and I mean this sincerely. It really wasn't anyone's fault. It was just a lot of bad luck.
Yeah.
But you can't tell that to players.
Yeah.
They're not going to understand that. They're gonna be like, well, the corporate environment like failed, and like that's what we know and that's what we think. And so going to that first match, like if we lose this, it's going to be really hard to bounce back. Thank God we beat Houston. But I guess broadly, no, we weren't ready for that season.
Okay. So kind of looking at that, you like Burnout is something I got talked about a lot last season, and I've talked about it with a couple people like this season. Kind of looking at going through the season one, how bad of an issue was Burnout for you and for your team?
I mean, I guess I can speak to everyone. I think we had a 12-man roster.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't 12 people. It was, 6 guys who played every match, and then, 2 to 3 who came in and out, depending on the situation. And so, because of that, I think there was a lot of burnout. I mean, he's got a big enough ego already, but I'll always give him credit. Like Neptuno or Alberto, he played through a lot of sickness and injury, played through a kidney stone. And, it's one of those things where in the moment he was like, of course I knew this. Like these guys are competitors. They're tanks, but it definitely affects them a lot. And I think for myself, I experienced a lot of burnout. I didn't have any really meaningful experiences outside of work for pretty much my entire first year. And that was really tough. And, I think, just the schedule of the one-off day, and it feels like you always crash into it.
Yeah.
It does, it's not like you're like, oh, okay, so we're gonna go drive down to Malibu, right?
Yeah.
Because let's go do it. It's like, no, you're gonna just try and recover and drink water.
You don't want to leave the house like on that off day. The off day is honestly just want to stay inside and not interact with anyone and maybe watch some anime and just be myself.
And I think too, it's like one of the things I like people get is that when you lose a game, like the nights after a loss, so we'd go back to the player house before we go home to eat dinner and just kind of finish everything out. It's like on the worst days, no one was talking to each other.
Yeah.
And that environment of everyone's so upset. There's the thing people need to understand about pro players. It's like why All Stars was so memey the year one is because it's really hard to tell a pro player that anything they're doing is the most important competition of their life. These guys are the reason that they're here. The reason that they're here is, yes, there's definitely raw talent. You can't be not talented and make it to the Overwatch League. But the biggest defining factor, the biggest scale is that they are so competitive.
Yeah.
And, after a loss, it there were nights it got pretty depressing, pretty bad. And even for myself too, it's I definitely I'm not a big public figure at all, but I was still a frontward member of the coaching staff. And I read all the DMs I got. I read all the Reddit comments, of people saying why are the coaching staff throwing? It's and some of them got mean and personal too. And you read those, and then you look up from your phone, and everyone's sitting around a table, no one's saying anything like that, but everyone's kind of upset and thinking about where to place blame or whatever. And I mean, that alone just is so sapping, is so draining. And obviously, even after a win, it's you all go celebrate. It feels good, but there's another match in a few days.
Yeah,
and it might be up against a tougher opponent. And so everyone's, it's there were definitely really rapid highs and lows. And I had some of the best moments of my life were in season 1 of Overwatch League because whether it was beating London in the stage 2 stage finals and getting to go up against New York, no one expected us to do that, and it was this huge moment of this is crazy. We're on this
Mm-hmm.
tear. There were other good moments too, but there were also a lot of really deep lows. And I think that when it's hard to disengage, you have no perspective because you're so in it. So those highs and lows, you're experiencing them all really authentically. You can't be oh, well, it's all fine.
Yeah,
this is over here and everything. Life is over here. This is everything. And I think that experience was really, really chaotic.
Do you think that part of it had to, you mentioned that in LA you were pretty alone because you didn't know anyone. Do you think that it has to do with kind of the culture of LA? Because something we kind of briefly talked about earlier, and something that I noticed coming from the Midwest, and I imagine you noticed coming from the East Coast, and I've talked to some other people too, is but like the culture of LA itself and like the people who are kind of in LA is very different than anything I've ever experienced. And I think we were kind of talking a little bit earlier, is like going to LA, I don't know if I'd actually make that many friends who are just like LAers, just because like our like the way that we look at life is so different, and it feels so not authentic to me.
Yeah, no, I mean people here don't wave back.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's like that's one thing I've noticed. Like, and my girlfriend now makes fun of me for it because I'll still do it to this day. I'll be like, someone will be crossing the street or like looking for a turn. I'm like, you go for it. No one ever waves back, and I'm still going to continue to do it. But the loneliness kind of went away because I think pretty early on, I was fortunate enough to make a lot of friends in the industry, like yourself included. I think there were a lot of people who were just kind of transplanted here, who all liked esports, who are all, and a lot of whom are like really thoughtful and kind people. And so, was able to establish that community. And I tried to very early on make friends inside the team because, it's after a loss, you don't want to be there with people who just lost, right? You want to like go ideally talk to someone who doesn't care about what happened on that screen. So I think I was able to kind of build up a community, but at the same time in that first year, it's like, you never see them. I mean, you remember like you came over for that 4th of July party that we had.
Yeah.
That was the only time we ever like had people over to our house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we had like a great house, right?
Yeah.
That was fun, but that was the only thing we ever really did like that. And so I do think that there was a community there, but it was hard to engage with just because of the schedule.
So I wanted to kind of ask you, you mentioned your 12-man roster earlier, and it really wasn't a 12-man roster. It was more of like a 6-man standard roster. Do you think that was a failing on your guys' part to not utilize sub better? So do you think it's just the way that it is?
I think that it's hard to say. I mean, everyone knows what happened to Sato.
Yeah.
He was, just for those of you who don't, Sato was issued a 30-game suspension, which is 3 stages, at the start of the season after we had signed him. The league did some diligence and they found what they found and banned him. And that kind of put a wrench threw a wrench into the plans because, we wanted to do in-houses. And we wanted to have effectively like 2 rosters that we could, put in and out. And because Sato couldn't play for 3 stages, it kind of created an environment where the B team was never going to be able to go in. Sorry, team 2, the second team was never going to be able to go in.
AB is not indicative of how good they are.
Yeah.
Team 2.
I want to be clear about that. Team 2, or Bravo team, whatever, they were never going to be able to go in their entirety because Sato was not allowed to play. And so what it meant was that the team that didn't have Sato, like that was the team that could actually put up on stage. And I think that, and I'm not saying that there weren't things we could have done, but what I'm saying is that the initial plan that we had kind of last minute became impossible.
Yep.
And again, like, I think maybe more seasoned or more intelligent coaching staff could have figured out a way to like, okay, like this happened, like we're going to do this thing now. It's going to work great. But I think with, when you add in all the chaos of, again, 12 basically strangers, 4 coaches who are also basically strangers in an organization that's new to esports, being several months late, crashing into the season, it just, I don't think we ever really were able to stop and reevaluate how we were doing things. And I wish we had. So definitely there's things that could have been done better, but in the moment, it was hard to identify.
Okay, and this is not just a Philly situation. I would like to add on to that because I feel like a lot of teams had subs that they didn't really utilize. I feel like one of the only teams that actually, like, not to like toot our own horn, but I feel like Gladiators was one of the few teams that actually like rotated people out most of the time. And maybe that's just because we didn't do as big of a roster and we added on later and we kind of like started off smaller and then added to it. That might be 100% why. But I felt like most teams weren't able to kind of utilize subs, and even like subs for us, we would kind of decide like on a stage basis, like who's going to mostly end up playing. And there might be slight changes to that, but most of the time it was set. Like we had a pretty good idea of who's going to play the entire stage, and that might switch depending on like proficiency and stuff like that. But I feel like most teams weren't able to utilize subs. And even now, subs are still a very interesting topic in like the Overwatch League, and the fact of like, well, a lot of times they don't really get used. Do you think that's an issue more so with teams not understanding how to utilize subs, or more of an issue that the game just isn't evolved enough to need subs?
I think it's a bit of both. I think one, and this is not a knock at anyone in particular, but I played sports growing up. And so, when I was on baseball teams, like especially, the school ones, like, and you're younger, your job is to be on the bench and come in late innings if they need you. And also a big part of your job is to be like help with practice and stuff like that. And that's you're a part of the team doing that. And for all these players who were selected into the inaugural season of the Overwatch League, the best of the best. I mean, Nate Manzer blew smoke up in everyone's ass, and I'm not faulting him for that. Like, it was really hype and cool, but it's like every player who was part of that Overwatch League season 1 had this sense of like elite grandeur. And I think for any player who then wasn't playing or wasn't starting, it kind of shattered that. And so there wasn't a sense of, oh, I'm a bench player, my job is to potentially be like, the idea of a pinch hitter or a pinch runner in baseball, where it's like, hey, like, yeah, you're not a starting player. In certain situations, we'll use you. And, you could think of that as, some sort of specialist or some sort of like, if someone gets sick, you'll come in. It didn't really jive with anyone.
Yeah.
And I think players had a hard time kind of understanding that. And I think part of it too is that, there is certainly fatigue as a game goes on. I mean, I brought up the stage 2 playoffs of season 1. Like, we grinded, we beat London in a long series, get into New York, we win the first 2 games, then we lose the next ones. And you could see the guys were tired. And so in that situation, I think that's an example of we haven't figured out how to use them properly yet, because definitely, if you're a team, if you're a coaching staff, you should be able to have players who can slot in, not for strategy, but just for fatigue.
Yeah.
And that's not something we prepared for. And it's hard, again, because you get limited scrim blocks in a day, and there's a lot of synergy and there's a lot of complexities of different strategies on however many different maps there are. I do think there's room to use them. I think that an attitude adjustment of players, as well as a strategy adjustment on coaching staff, needs to happen before people can do that meaningfully.
That is something I have noticed with players, is that all players want to be the front runner and none are good being supportive. At least a lot of the players that I've talked to. I've never seen someone who's been like, oh, you know what? I'm happy just sitting on the bench and supporting my team. I have not met someone yet who's kind of like that. Everyone is like, no, I want to be the one who's leading the team, or I want to be the one who's there kind of pushing for. Do you think that's a cultural issue with esports and the way that esports is kind of brought up to the current situation? Because if you look at like professional sports, you're raised at the age of like, God, sometimes 3, like, to start interacting with people, and like this idea of a team culture, not an individual culture. Do you think that a lot of it has to do with the culture overall of esports and how it got to where it is?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think most of these players, they stream, they grind solo queue, where they're like, always carrying their teams. They stream enough social media, they have these fans who are like, you're number one, you're the best, like, you're going to do it. And then they get there again, like, all on, like, you get scouted to a team based only on individual performance, generally speaking, right? Like, unless someone buys out a previous organization, you're like, wow, their teamwork is really good. It's, and you, of course, in the trials, you listen to comms and you kind of figure out how they communicate like that, but it's always on their own individual right. And so I think based on that kind of wave of support, and also, like, I talked about earlier, to be a pro player, you have to really genuinely believe that you're the best.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're not going to do it. Like, if you don't think that you're the best person out there, you're not going to grind. You're not going to go for it. And so then they get confronted with potentially that they're not. And I think it's tough. And what I want to say that, there were players who reacted to it with more grace than others. Mm-hmm. And it's not that every player is a huge jerk about it. I mean,
100%.
Shadowburn, one of my favorite people in esports, Fraggy as well. They were both, hey, come on. They were both so, obviously they're pro players and they were like, I'm the best, I want to play. But when put on the bench, they were still just trying to figure out ways to help the team. And they were very, very, very patient. And I have a lot of respect for both of them for doing that. Sorry, 1 second. Let me get this camera out of here. But yeah, I do think it's a problem with the industry as a whole, and with the way that recruiting happens, and with the way that like, for a lot of players, there was no one in the Overwatch League Season 1 that I can think of that didn't play on some Tier 2, Tier 1 org before the Overwatch League. Yeah. So it's not as though they hadn't had an experience being a part of a team environment, but, contenders teams don't really carry subs because they hardly make enough money to support, 6 players and maybe one staff person who's team manager, like team psychologist, team coach, team mom, everything, right?
Yeah, everything.
And so, subs is not a thing that really gets utilized. It was not a thing back then that got utilized. So I think, it's a foreign concept for everyone.
So kind of looking at Philly and the way that your season kind of progressed through the future, you were doing kind of like analytical work for them. Was that analytical work very similar to like the stuff that you did with your previous company, or was it different? Is it just mostly like what your stuff looks like on your Medium posts?
Yeah. I think I did less for the team than people think. Just candidly, I've mentioned this before, but when I got hired, we talked about like breaking into esports is tough, and for me, I made a pitch of, hey, I can do both. Like, I'll be your business development analyst. I'll be your, whenever you need to make a deck to go to sponsors or investors, or to decide like, what players to, acquire, whatever. I'll be the guy who does it. And I can also be an in-game coach. Like, I know the game pretty well. And, I do think that there's an ability to use data to kind of inform coaching decisions.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening, just for various reasons, is that, I did a lot more of the non-coaching analytics stuff with the team. And I think that, and maybe you can relate to this too, because, you were part of the coaching staff, but you weren't a guy who had, coached competitively before, from my understanding.
Yeah.
I think that there can be a lot of imposter syndrome. I certainly suffered from it, where it was like, I wasn't a guy who dropped out of college and coached a tier two scene from like my parents' house, and I wasn't a guy who was GM and had played professionally myself before, semi-professionally myself before, and I think that that kind of imposter syndrome and that feeling of like, my opinion's less valid, I think led me to embrace more of the projects that were on the business side, because those are things that I knew I could knock out of the park. Those are things that I had a lot of experience in and I felt really confident in. And so, as weeks would go by, every week I'd always start like being in every scrim, watching the scrims, giving my opinion. And then, by the Tuesday, the week starts on Monday in theory. The Tuesday I'd be like sidelined on some other project. And then, I'd come back in the next day or the day after that. And by that point, everything had changed. And I was like, oh, okay, well, like now it's too late and I gotta, reset and go to next week. And there were some good moments. Like towards the end of the season, I actually created a tool that would allow you to directly query VODs. So you could say like, show me every time LA Valiant sets up a dive on Volskaya Point 2. Yeah. And by set up a dive, I mean like, the monkey or the tracer or the diva killed the enemies in Yacht or something. Yeah. And that was really helpful. And I actually had like a few really good VOD sessions with the players based on that. And there were, some other moments of the season. I created some like automatic scouting tools. Yeah. I led a few VOD review sessions to, and based on some data, but then also doing like, actual like real tape review and stuff. And those moments are really great. And even though they were fairly scattered, when they happened, I felt really, really happy about it. And, at the same time, I also, I was in the team house every day. And like I mentioned before, there was always tension. I think some moments were worse than others, but, I'd be there with the team talking about results, and became friends with some of the guys. And I think some of the players were a bit frustrated because, I was supposed to be their coach. And, to them, it's hard to explain to them like, hey guys, like, yeah, the game is really important, but also like my boss asked me to put together a deck for this thing and I got to go do that. Yeah. And I think for a lot of the guys, when we lose, there was oftentimes like there were fingers pointed everywhere. I think with every team, there's always like, and often like, these pro players are the first ones to blame themselves. But part of it would be like, oh man, like, if we'd had more coaching support, we could have done better in this game. That was really hard for me to deal with. And I think, compounded with the imposter syndrome thing I was talking about, made it difficult to be as involved with the team strategically as I wanted to be. So the long and short of it is that, the role that I'm in now is different in a lot of ways, especially in terms of like schedule and, work environment. I'm not working the team house 6 days a week anymore. But, a lot of the projects that I work on now are similar to ones I worked in year one.
Okay. So year one, you were involved with the team, but you were like only like partially involved with the team? Like if you had to say like your time allotment, like out of 100% was like 25% given towards the team and 75% towards the other, or?
It's hard to say because like I said, my office was literally in the team house.
Yeah.
And so every day, like I'm with the guys, and I wouldn't say I was a mental coach by any point, but I was there like mediating, resolving issues, talking through things with the guys, like talking with the coaches, being involved, went to every single game in the dugout, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's maybe closer to like 40% or something if you include all that, but yeah, definitely the majority of my time was not spent on the game.
Okay, so what kind of stuff would you be working on? Can you go into any of that stuff that you kind of working on the first year?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just set up because we were a startup company. Obviously, I know it's funny to say because we operated within the Comcast empire, but we were the esports startup.
Yeah.
So I set up a lot of like social monitoring tools, just things to create kind of reports and how our posts and stuff were doing. I would put together a lot of kind of expansion, business development type things of like, even from early on, we were thinking about what the next step for Spector Gaming would be in terms of esports. And there's a lot of research that goes in there, like figuring out what content creators to bring on. We have the Fusion Stars, the streamers that are signed under our brand. Like that whole project was something I helped out a lot with by doing kind of analytics on viewer engagement, doing modeling based on what kind of salaries don't make sense based on how many minutes they brought in, and then potentially leveraging that against sponsors. I helped do some scouting for the contenders team. Like we ran a few tournaments in Philly. I was always the person to kind of like help. I think we did something called the Hometown Heroes, which is we allowed people to kind of like openly apply to join the contenders team, and it culminated with a tournament hosted by Nerd Street. I put together the bracket and all that stuff for that. So it was just a lot of little one-off things, and a part of it too was I was told by my boss that the Beezy work thing, that my blog was like part of my team responsibilities, was to kind of like it's because it's content creation, right?
Yeah.
And it was Fusion branded, so it's Fusion branded content. That's something I did, and I think there were some times where like the blogs would be the result of an analysis I'd done for the team. Mm-hmm. Or an analysis I'd done for my boss, where he was like, I did one post about how much spectating time each team was getting. That was because my boss one day was like, I feel like we're getting less spectating time than the other teams. Like, and I was like, okay, well, I can write a little CD program to screen record and figure out which team's being spectated and then do an analysis on it. And so that ended up turning into a blog post as well. But it was a lot of random things. And with any team, like, with you, I'm sure you had times where it was like, okay, like you're someone who's trained in mental health and all that stuff, but I'm sure there were times you're like, okay, well, someone needs to go out and grab a paper towel, right? It just there's a limited number of people there, so I also do stuff like that, help people move and logistics.
Okay, so kind of looking at like how your role transitioned, how did that come about? Like, did you go to them and be like, listen, I really like the business aspect, I really like being involved more or less, I think these are my strong skill suits. Did you have to pitch them that, or did they kind of be like, hey, listen, we think this is just a natural transition for you?
It was a little bit of both. I know I'm. It's weak for me to say this because I did 1 year in esports.
I don't know if it's
actually weak. a little bit less. I couldn't handle it anymore. The environment of being like a real part of the team, like, and maybe it would have been different if I didn't feel if like I'd actually been like 100% in. But the having one foot in one door, one foot in another, you're never really in. If you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, you're not in any single room. Like I wasn't full on like a member of the corporate staff, and I wasn't full on a member of the team. And I always know whichever environment I was in, I'd always feel like I didn't belong there because I was like, oh, if I'm with the team, I feel like they think of me as corporate. If I'm doing the corporate stuff, they think of me as just a coach. And that was tough. And I think also just socially, even I was getting tired of not really doing anything. So I talked to team staff, to kind of like upper management, and I think it was a bit of both too. Where they're like, yeah, we think as we go into year 2 and we're expanding operations, it makes sense now to have a corporate office and kind of like not just everyone working the team house. And yeah, I think it'd be a good fit for you. And I definitely have some regrets. Maybe regrets the wrong word. I think looking back on it, if the point of all this was to never have a what if. I don't know if I fully did that with my engagement with the team. I think maybe I'll always think like, okay, what if I had gone all in right at the start? like was like 100% no, I'm going to be a coach, and you take this business stuff, you put it over there, and maybe someone else can do that. Maybe I'll hire an assistant or something. But looking back, this was definitely the right decision. I mean, like I'm in a relationship now, and I have friends who are not people on the team, and I go hiking, I go skiing. It's definitely a much better life now, and I'm much happier. But I do miss it.
So this happier life is because like for me, like obviously my position is like this is the goal that we should kind of get to. Like that's like what I hear about esports. That's the goal I would like to see esports get to, or at least as close as possible to it. I don't know if it's completely possible, but I think there's a lot of things that can be done to help kind of progress towards that goal. Do you think that it can get to that, or do you think that my like thought process is just unrealistic?
I don't know. I'd point to conventional sports again, which at some point this is going to stop being a reliable like thing to base things off. But like if you read interviews with basketball players, like baseball players who spend so much time on the road, and then they oftentimes have families in their home cities. They talk. It's tough, and I think they have a lot of the same pressures of maybe they're not as engaged with their fans as the esports players are because they don't have personal streams, but they are more famous and certainly get more hate. I'm sure if any member of the NBA read all the comments in r/NBA, they'd be miserable. But clearly those careers last a lot longer than esports ones. So it gives me hope that with the right infrastructure, people like yourself, people, even just like logistical differences of, you said like you don't put scrims on a Sunday. Yeah. It's a huge thing. That would have gone a long way, I think. So I do have hope. I don't know. I think Overwatch League was supposed to be this marriage of profession, like, kind of like real companies. It's not just like some 20-year-old who founded a team and now he's in the LCS. Like no hate on CLG or TSM. Obviously they've done amazingly, but like, this is like real structure and stuff. And I do think it's getting there, but I am optimistic, but I don't think it's there yet.
Okay. So kind of looking at your role now, you don't do anything with the team, right? As far as like analytic work?
No, not really. I think there's one or two things we still kind of maintain for them in terms of like small little tools, but we're not really involved with the team at all. I mean, I go to games occasionally. I watch most of our games, whether it's on like, it's on my phone when I'm falling asleep or whatever. And I still talk with some of the guys. Like I play League with Neptuno and Boombox occasionally. But no, I don't professionally do much for the Fusion.
Okay, so maybe you can kind of look. I don't know how much of an outsider you are with this. Like, obviously, season 1 was really burning for like everyone. I have said that I've been kind of critical about season 2, and I don't think it actually fixed the things that it set out to fix. I think it gave kind of an opportunity to fix those things that actually won't be implemented very well. And the idea was they thought, let's lessen the amount of games and we'll make it so people can have longer breaks. In my opinion, I don't think anyone ever utilized those breaks because very simply, if you can practice more and get better than the other teams, you're going to practice more and get better than the other teams. So like that's how the logic in my head works. And from what I've heard so far, because I had Harsh on this show, he very much said that we practice the same amount that we practiced last time. It's just slightly easier for coaches because there's less games that we have to worry about prepping for. So in your eyes, do you think that the Burnout has gotten any better over the last, like comparing the second season to the first season?
I can't speak to the other teams in the league, but for the Fusion, it's gotten better. And I think it's almost none to do with the scheduling changes from the Overwatch League and a lot to do with team structure. Our team manager, Roston Yu, is like a really smart, really high IQ, high EQ person. And he was given, last year, just like all of it, just like the coaching staff, like everything happened last minute, like players are rushing to the house. He didn't really have time to like do any of the structures. And this year he did, and he's done a lot better. I mean, there's so many things that we're better at about like clearing, like last year, for example, in season 1, we'd have on a given, even on an off day, there'd be tons of staff members at the house. And I think for the players, it felt oftentimes like they didn't have a home because they wake up, there'd be some random guy in their kitchen, like, was there for a business meeting.
Yeah.
And this year, I mean, Roston, to his credit, is really taking care of a lot of this stuff. I think the guys have a lot more separation. There's just a lot better attitude around. It's fewer games, but I mean, the map pools are larger too. So I think like, if you look at the structural Overwatch League changes and with the homesteads, like I think they're amazing. Like Atlanta and Dallas were so freaking hype, but that's really draining on players to travel like that. Yeah. So, I don't I do think it's gotten better for us, but I credit that to the staff of the team rather than any big decisions made by the Owl.
Okay, I could 100% get behind that, and I could see like anyone who does improve in that. I feel like it has to be probably more internal than it is external of the league. So looking at the future, obviously they've already kind of announced that there's going to be a bunch of different homesteads. There's going to be a bunch of different traveling events. We're going to start to kick that up. We've already kind of seen how Burnout kind of affects people. Do you think that Burnout is going to get worse coming forward with these homesteads? Because I'm terrified. Like, I won't lie. Unless you have someone in there who is like legitimately like that is their job, is to help try to focus on that. And this is not saying hire me. This is saying you should have someone because you're going to get fucked. I'm like terrified.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is that, there's going to be a bit of a culture shock for a lot of these players. Like right now, I mean, for myself too, right? Like I moved to LA, and part of what helped me get through things was that there's this big esports community here. And you take it. I think the Koreans in particular have a tough time adjusting because they have a particular diet and stuff.
Yeah.
Every major city in the world obviously has like a Chinatown or whatever, but they're not going to have the same resources in Boston or Florida or Philly even or any of these cities as they do in LA. And in season one, like a lot of the Korean players and a lot of the European players would like hang out with each other cross team. And they know each other, and that would be helpful to have a sense of community like that. And there's also other esports out here. A lot of them know some of the LoL pros. A lot of them know some of the PUBG guys. And I think that potentially that loss of community, where one just legitimately like there's no Koreatown that's as big as the Koreatown in LA anywhere else in the States or Europe for that matter. That compounded with the traveling, it might get tough for some people, and I'm worried about that, but. I don't really know. I'm hopeful that most teams have a plan for it.
I'm not hopeful for that, but it's okay. It's the difference in our viewpoints. I feel like I'm a lot more maybe pessimistic sometimes. So, but say, Livy, kind of looking at your role now, where do you see yourself in like 5 years? Where do you want to kind of be at with what you're doing now? Do you want to is Comcast and Fusion something that is going to be like a lifetime job? Is that what you're hoping for, or are you hoping to transition into something else in the future?
It's hard to say. I think that esports is a young industry, and so there's a lot of exciting opportunities. Like there's, especially from a data analytics standpoint. I mean, there's the Blitz app for League, there's HS Replay for Hearthstone, Mobalytics for League as well, and these other tools that I think are doing a lot, and there's a lot of really intelligently designed things like that. But I think there's a lot still missing from the space. Like biometrics is something that was something when I was getting interviewed to get hired, I was like, yeah, I want to do that. I want all these players to be having wearables, and I want to, we talked earlier about the idea of player fatigue. Like I want to be able to, from the dugout, be able to say, hey, that player is tired. We should sub them out. Those are things that we never got to do for various reasons, but I think things like that are crucial to the future, even with eye tracking. And so I think a company like Comcast, where upper management is very, very smart, and they're thinking about the right things, and obviously the company has a lot of resources. There's a big opportunity to potentially this be the company that can lead the way in a lot of those things, and I'd love to be involved in that. That's like a dream of mine. At the same time, I'm 27 now, and in 5 years, like the most important thing to me might not be redefining how we do biometrics in esports. It might be like having a family and being close to my family. So I don't know. I am optimistic about the future of Spector Gaming, the subsidiary of Comcast. And right now I'm happy where I'm at, but I don't know exactly what the future will hold.
Awesome. This has been a really fun interview. I've got to ask a lot of enlightening things, I think. I hope you've enjoyed your time. I have one question for you left. This is my last question. If you watch these interviews, you should know what this question is. If you haven't, then you're going to be blindsided here a little bit. It's arguably the hardest or easiest question, depending on who you are. Having been on the experience of being on the show, it's very unique and kind of different. If you could pick anyone to be on the show, okay, the only criteria is they have to speak English, because I'm very uncultured and only speak English. And 2, they need to be involved in esports in some aspect. Who would you have on the show?
That's a toughie. It's a toughie right there.
If you pick someone who I've had, I'll let you know.
No, I'd probably pick Roston, our team manager. He's like I said, and maybe I'm biased in saying this, but he's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met. And he is like, you could talk about in the trenches every day. Like, the guy, he lives with the team. And I think that he's someone who is very perceptive, and like he was, we probably could have benefited from having a team shrink or a team mental health coach for year one, but Rawson stepped up and did a lot of that. So I think he'd be someone who'd do really well in this environment. He's also a very well-spoken guy.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that I have for you, Ethan. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. If you want to do any shout outs, you can. I normally don't give them just because I don't, but if you want them, you're more than welcome to have them.
Shout out to my cat Gordy, who was playing with the ball and probably ruining the audio for this entire interview. Thanks for putting up with that. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. I think I haven't had a therapy session in a long time, so it was an interesting experience to have one in this context. But thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. For everyone out there, this has been Deep Dives in the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panishevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.